Welcome to the deep dive. We pull the key insights from complex topics so you don't have to wade through it all yourself. Today, we're tackling something huge in healthcare, truly personalized medicine. The idea of getting the exact right treatment just for you, exactly when you need it. It sounds amazing, right? But the challenge has always been, well, how do you actually do that for everyone when every patient's story is different, buried in just mountains of data? So, in this deep dive, we're looking at something pretty groundbreaking. It uses just an incredible amount of real world health data combined with advanced AI to sort of predict patient futures. It's not quite a crystal ball, obviously, but think of it more like a really sophisticated predictive engine. It goes beyond just stats to guess, well, anticipate individual patient paths. It's fascinating stuff.
Exactly. And our mission today is really to unpack how this new AI model, it's called CoMET, is turning what we call real-world evidence, or RWE, into insights you can actually use, personalized insights. And, what does this really mean for where healthcare is going? We'll look at the massive data behind it, how it learns from these complex medical histories, and some of its, frankly, surprising abilities across a whole range of clinical jobs. It feels like a pretty big leap forward, and we want to break down exactly why.
Okay, so the goal is clear. Proactive, personalized care. But like you said, getting there means dealing with just tons of this real-world data, RWD. We know clinical trials are crucial, but they happen in controlled settings, right? Specific groups of people. So why is this messier real-world data, RWD, so vital for genuine personalized medicine? And what's been the main hurdle in using it effectively at scale?
Yeah, that's a really important point. RWD gives us this scalable window into how healthcare actually happens, in the wild.
Yeah.
But turning that raw data into solid, real-world evidence, the kind that doctors can trust, well, that's historically needed a lot of specialized analysis. A huge amount of manual work, really. And that's been a major bottleneck, slowing down our ability to learn from the data that shows how things really work day to day.
Right, that manual curation bottleneck. So how do we get past that? How do we unlock what's hidden in all that RWD?
Well, the answer in this particular case is something called Epic Cosmos. And Cosmos isn't just like a database. It's this amazing collaboration between different health systems, all using Epic's electronic health records. They pool their de-identified patient records longitudinally, so over time. As of August 2025, we're talking data for over 300 million unique patients. That covers 16.3 billion encounters. It's
Yeah.
a monumental scale.
Wow, 300 million patients, 16 billion encounters. But it's not just the sheer size, is this? It's the kind of data Cosmos brings together, because it's more than just the standard stuff like lab results or diagnoses.
Absolutely. It goes much deeper. It brings together the usual clinical data labs, diagnoses, meds, procedures, you name it. But also these broader factors that really impact health. Things like social drivers of health, cancer staging details, even genomic variants, and patient-reported outcomes. And critically, it figures out when data from different hospitals belongs to the same patient, it deduplicates, creating this single long-term view for each person. It's not just a spreadsheet. It's more like a coherent health story over time. And it's already used for some things, like predicting median length of stay right now.
Okay, so Cosmos provides this incredible foundation. But even with all that data, figuring out one specific clinical question used to mean building custom analyses each time.
That's right. You'd need custom cohorts, specific ways of preparing the data, unique statistical models, very time-consuming. And that's where these things called foundation models come in. They're a different breed of AI. They learn directly from patient journeys, but they see them as sequences of medical events, like a timeline. They learn these hidden patterns, these latent representations, basically, a compressed understanding of the entire patient history. It lets the model grasp subtle connections we might miss. And this allows them to simulate potential future health timelines for specific patients, giving us a glimpse ahead.
And the specific model we're focusing on is CoMET, the Cosmos Medical Event Transformer. You mentioned it's a decoder-only transformer. What does that mean in practice?
So that architecture is really good at something called autoregressive generation. Fancy term, but it basically means predicting the next thing in a sequence based on everything that came before. CoMET is actually a family of these models. They were pre-trained on a huge chunk of Cosmos, 118 million patients, 115 billion medical events. That's 151 billion tokens in AI terms. What it does is generate the next likely medical event in a patient's sequence. It's simulating where their health story might go next, based on their past.
That's fascinating. And one of the really big deals with models like this, like the big language models everyone talks about, is how they get better with more data and power, right? These scaling laws.
Exactly. Scaling laws describe this predictable link between model size, the amount of training data, and the computing power you throw at it. More of those usually means better performance. It's like a recipe for improvement.
And this study did something pretty unique with that for medical data.
It really did. This CoMET study is the largest analysis of scaling laws for medical event data ever done. We're talking over 300 times bigger than previous work in this area.
Yeah.
And the key finding, they found these power law relationships for compute, data, tokens, model size that looked remarkably similar to what we see in language models. The specific numbers, the coefficients were alpha equals 0.520 and beta equals 0.512. The big takeaway here is predictability. We found a kind of universal accelerator for medical AI, like Moore's law, but for clinical insights. Double the computer data, get a predictable jump in performance.
So it's predictable. You can basically map out how much better it'll get if you add more resources. But you mentioned a medical twist, something about the data needed.
Yes, there was a distinct finding. They found an optimal token to parameter ratio, basically data points to model size of around 1,000 to 1. And that's different from what works best for natural language.
What does that difference imply? Why more data per model size for medicine?
It suggests that medical data, patient histories, they're just inherently richer, more complex perhaps. You need proportionally more detailed data, more tokens for a given model size to really get the best results. And connecting this back, this predictability is just huge. It confirms that making the models bigger and feeding them more data consistently makes them learn better. It decreases the training loss. And crucially, making them learn better during training consistently improves how well they perform on actual clinical tasks later on. It's not just theory, it gives a clear roadmap for making CoMET even better in the future. Push the scale, get better clinical predictions.
So what this means for you, the listener, is that as we get better at gathering and processing this data, these AI tools will become increasingly powerful at understanding health. It opens up possibilities we couldn't really grasp before. Okay, this is the really exciting bit. Seeing CoMET actually do stuff. How good is it at real clinical tasks? Because the claim is pretty bold. A general model, trained broadly, doing well on specific tasks without extra training for each one.
It is quite remarkable. Let's start with just generating realistic medical histories. CoMET, the biggest model, was incredibly good at generating valid sequences of events like diagnosis codes, medication codes, lab results. The error rates were tiny, like 0.011% for diagnoses. But it wasn't just about getting the codes right. It accurately reproduced how common certain events are and how often different conditions or treatments occur together. It shows it's learned the underlying clinical logic, you could say.
Wow. Okay, so it understands the patterns, but can it predict future interactions like hospital visits?
Yes. It showed excellent calibration, meaning its predictions were well aligned with reality for forecasting the number and type of encounters a patient might have in the next year. Office visits, ER trips, hospital stays. And get this, it actually outperformed traditional supervised models specifically built just for that task. It had a lower mean absolute error, or MAE, meaning its predictions were closer to the actual numbers.
That's impressive. Better than models designed just for that prediction. Okay, what about predicting the risk of specific diseases? That seems like a core promise here.
Absolutely. Let's look at type 2 diabetes outcomes. For things like predicting the 1-year or 3-year risk of cardiovascular events, ASCVD, kidney disease progression, neuropathy, retinopathy, even future HbA1c levels. CoMET generally did better than or matched the specialized supervised models. For high cholesterol hyperlipidemia, while maybe not beating every baseline, its performance clearly got better the bigger the CoMET model was. That scaling really showed up. And for hypertension, high blood pressure, CoMET matched or beat the supervised models on about half the prediction tasks.
Okay, so strong performance on chronic disease complications. What about predicting flare-ups, like an asthma attack?
Good question. They looked at acute on chronic events, predicting the 2-year risk of things like an asthma exacerbation, a sickle cell crisis, or a heart failure flare-up. In nearly all of those tasks, CoMET achieved a higher IUCRC score than the specialized supervised models. That means it was better at distinguishing patients who would have an event from those who wouldn't.
And what about predicting when someone gets a disease for the first time, like a first heart attack or dementia diagnosis? Those can be rare events, hard to predict.
Right. Those are often highly imbalanced data sets. Lots of people don't get the disease in the time frame. Here, CoMET achieved higher PRAUC scores than the supervised models on all 6 tasks they tested. PRAUC is a better metric for these imbalanced cases because it focuses on the precision of the positive predictions. So yes, it showed strength even when predicting relatively rare first-time events.
This is really getting interesting. Differential diagnosis, helping doctors figure out what's wrong when symptoms are confusing. Can AI really help there?
This is one of the most compelling results, I think. CoMET can provide a ranked list of possible diagnoses with probabilities for a specific patient. They tested it on complex cases in liver pancreas bile duct diseases and rheumatic diseases. CoMET-L flagged the correct diagnosis for over half the patients by the time the diagnosis was actually made. And even more impressively, for over a quarter of them, it flagged it weeks before the final diagnosis. And crucially, it could tell apart patients who looked similar initially, but ended up having different conditions. The standard models struggled with that kind of subtlety, but CoMET did better.
Weeks ahead of time. That could make a huge difference. It's moving from just reacting to symptoms to actively anticipating the diagnosis.
Exactly. It's about providing that earlier insight, supporting the clinician's thinking process.
Okay, one more area. Predicting how patients use the health system itself, like hospital stays.
Yes, forecasting interactions. This has big implications for how hospitals manage resources. CoMET showed a lower mean absolute error when predicting how long a patient would stay in the hospital compared to the supervised models. So, more accurate length of stay predictions. And it also achieved a higher ACROC score for predicting 30-day hospital readmissions. The score was 0.770 for CoMET versus 0.717 for the best comparison model. That's a significant improvement.
Better predictions for length of stay and readmissions. That helps hospitals plan better, potentially improving patient flow and resource use. Looking at all these capabilities, what really stands out to you? For me, it feels less like just prediction and more like generating genuinely useful early clinical intelligence.
I agree. It's the breadth and the depth, all stemming from that single general pre-training. It suggests a shift towards AI that doesn't just answer one question, but understands the whole patient context in a much richer way.
Of course, as amazing as this sounds, no technology is perfect. It's really important we talk about the limitations too, right? Transparency is crucial here.
Absolutely. We need to be clear about what CoMET can't do yet, or where the challenges lie. So what are those boundaries? Well, first, the data itself. Cosmos is incredible, but it's still real-world data. That means it can have inaccuracies, documentation errors, the usual messiness of healthcare records. Plus, if a patient gets care outside a hospital contributing to Cosmos, that data is missing. So the record isn't always perfectly complete.
Okay, so data quality and completeness are inherent challenges. What about how the model processes the data? You mentioned tokenization earlier.
Right. The way it currently turns continuous things like lab values or time intervals into discrete tokens might sometimes smooth over small but potentially important changes. Also, the model has a limit to how much history it can look back at. The context window is 8,192 tokens. For patients with very long, complex histories, that might not cover everything.
And it's only using structured data right now. What's being left out?
A lot, potentially. It doesn't currently use information from doctors' clinical notes, medical images, or free text lab results. Think about all the nuance in those. It also doesn't yet incorporate things like vital signs, allergies, or records of specific medication doses given. So key pieces of the puzzle are still missing.
And how it was evaluated, you mentioned it focused on overall performance.
Yeah, the evaluations were thorough, but mainly looked at average performance across the board. They didn't dive deep into how well it performs for specific subgroups of patients, say, by race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. Ensuring fairness and equity across different populations is a critical next step.
So, quite a few limitations, but they also seem to point clearly towards what needs to happen next. Where does CoMET development go from here?
Exactly. These limitations basically define the roadmap for future work. That's actually quite exciting. They plan to incorporate new types of events, those genomic variants, social drivers of health, cancer staging details we mentioned, plus pediatric data, and a really big one, bringing in multimodal data, integrating images, clinical notes. That could be a game changer for understanding. The goal is also to push beyond just predicting risk towards counterfactual reasoning, asking what-if questions, like what would likely happen if we started this patient on metformin today. That's a much more sophisticated level of clinical support. They're also looking at better ways to handle time, like time-to-event analysis, and exploring fine-tuning the models to make them even sharper on specific tasks when needed.
The potential really does feel transformative. You start to imagine a tool that doesn't just flag risk, but helps doctors and hospitals actively manage care, maybe spotting rare diseases earlier, optimizing hospital flow. It feels like it's pushing healthcare towards being much more personalized, much more efficient, and hopefully just plain more effective for every single one of us.
That's the vision, using this vast data resource and powerful AI to create a system that anticipates needs and tailors care more precisely.
So we've taken quite the deep dive today into CoMET, this generative AI model built on the massive Epic Cosmos dataset. We've seen how it learns from billions of medical events, how its performance scales predictably, and its ability to simulate patient futures for tasks like disease prediction, diagnosis support, and even predicting hospital use.
CoMET's knack for capturing these complex clinical patterns and providing general insights from real-world data really does feel like a major step towards that promise of personalized medicine. It's a powerful new kind of tool, ultimately aimed at helping clinicians make better decisions, making healthcare run smoother, and improving outcomes for patients.
So here's a final thought for you to take away. As data and AI like this become more integrated into healthcare, how might this kind of predictive power fundamentally change your experience with the health system over the next decade? Could it make your care feel more proactive, more precise, more uniquely focused on you? Something to think about.